Domain expansion is the pinnacle of any sorcerer's ability in the Jujutsu world. It's also the strongest technique a sorcerer can use, and this is so because it's a skill that allows a sorcerer to create a personal space where anyone caught in that tries to escape cannot, because it's almost impossible to. Once a skilled sorcerer makes use of a domain expansion, the user has complete control, and their powers are at their peak, but the opponent is at a huge disadvantage, which in most cases leads to their death. But a domain can be counter, as a wise man once said,
"When two domains are laid out at the same time, the more refined one will dominate that space."
So in this video, we will be listing the most refined domains in Jujutsu Kaisen. Starting up with number 1, we have Time Cell Moon Palace. The Zenin clan is amongst one of the most powerful and respected clans in the Jujutsu world, but underneath all these lies a different set of crazily powerful people, one of which was Naoya Zenin. Naoya had one goal, and it was to become the leader of the Zenin clan, but after the total annihilation of the clan by Maki, his dreams fell apart. But Naoya wouldn't give up, and he was reborn as a vengeful cursed spirit that was all bent on revenge. Time Cell Moon is one of the powerful abilities that he had after being reborn. This domain sends his opponent to a world where they're on a long path made of flesh that leads to a giant, glaring eyeball. Naoya is seen standing between his opponent and the eye. Once he activates his technique within the domain, his projection sorcery is on an entirely different level with his auto-hit technique. First off, anyone that messes up by moving at 24 frames per second gets attacked by reels of film. When Naoya targets you with his technique, instead of turning your whole body into a frame, he can decide to target the individual cells in your body, hence the cell in the domain's name. What this simply does to his opponent is that Naoya can manipulate the cells in his opponent's body by making them stay in place every time they move, causing wounds and ruptures to open all over your body. So anyone trapped in this domain is pretty much screwed. However, Maki would be able to defeat Naoya in his domain simply because she has no cursed energy, thus making her unable to be attacked by the guaranteed hit technique. Horizon of the Captivating Skanda. In terms of beauty and serenity, this domain ranks number 1 majorly because of it being a beach that looks serene and good for relaxation. You should have seen this domain early in the season 1 of Jujutsu Kaisen because it was the hangout of Jogo, Mahito, Geto, and Hanami. This domain actually belongs to Dagon. If you don't remember who he is, or let's say was, since he's dead, let me refresh your memory. Dagon is the big red octopus that hangs around Geto and his friends. Now, unlike the others, Dagon is actually a cursed womb, and this simply means he has different stages of evolution that he can access via his powers. Once Dagon transforms to his true form, he activates his domain expansion, which takes you to a good-looking beach that you can vacation in if you are his friend. This domain allows Dagon to spawn fishes Shikigami with extremely sharp teeth, and he also has a sure hit attack that allows him to summon a swarm of these fishes that chomps down on his opponents until there's nothing left. This is something that is straight out of Jaws, which is rightly so since Dagon is the manifestation of the fear of the ocean. Despite it being so pleasing to the eye, it's easily one of the weakest domains in the series. The Graveyard Domain. This is one interesting domain expansion, and this is because it was opened by a small pox curse during the Shibuya incident. This is quite unusual because curses can't use domain expansion, but smallpox curse is an exception because it's a powerful one. The smallpox curse was used by Kenjaku to stop Meimei in the Shibuya subway station. Until the very end, this curse proved itself at being useful. This domain works by entrapping its enemy in a ghostly graveyard. The person would be trapped in a coffin that is locked tight. Then a massive boulder would be dropped on the coffin, sealing the person inside. Once the victim doesn't escape the coffin within 3 seconds, the smallpox curse inflicts the person with its signature disease and kills them. Despite this technique being so powerful, Meimei was able to trick the cursed spirit by forcing her younger brother in the coffin long enough for her to completely defeat the curse. Smallpox curse was definitely no match for her, despite it being powerful. Coffin of the Iron Mountain. This is one of the first domain expansions seen by fans in Season 1 of Jujutsu Kaisen. It was used by Jogo in his fight against Gojo Satoru. Jogo's domain brings his opponent into a fiery cave filled with molten rocks as lava shoots all around, a true depiction of the disaster curse of fire and volcanoes. The heat and pressure in this domain is so insane, and it was said by Jogo that anyone unlucky enough to be caught up in his domain would burst up in flames immediately due to how hot it is. This is, however, just a side effect of the domain. The auto-hit of this domain is the magma erupting, which sends large chunks of rocks flying towards his opponents in an attempt to crush them with a magma-filled boulder. And if that doesn't work, he can use his biggest technique in the domain, which is summoning a massive burning meteor to destroy everything, including his opponent in the domain. However, this domain was easily defeated by Gojo during their fight when he summoned his own domain inside that of Jogo, thereby canceling it entirely. Chimera Shadow Garden. Megumi's 10 Shadow technique is ranked in the list of strongest curse techniques in Jujutsu Kaisen, giving his domain, Chimera Shadow Garden, a great deal of power. Megumi's domain expansion is still incomplete, but considering the fact that he is accidentally working his way towards a completely barrierless domain expansion, it makes sense that it's one of the hardest types to create. So far, only Sukuna and Kenjaku are the ones who have successfully accomplished this. In Megumi's domain, he can summon an infinite number of Shikigami, which makes it very powerful, especially when we consider the fact that any of the summons can be pretty useful in any situation. This is not all, as Megumi can also create clones of himself that climbs out of the ocean of darkness. He can use them as storage spaces of different cursed tools and objects. The liquid in this domain is actually an endless void that will completely swallow anyone who sinks into it. So far, we've seen that Megumi can only use this domain by making use of a place in the real world as the container for it, like a gym or a cave. But eventually, this domain may be able to rival Sukuna's malevolent shrine and even Gojo's infinite void. Self-embodiment of perfection. Self-embodiment of perfection is the domain expansion of the cursed spirit Mahito. Mahito is an entity that embodies the collective negative emotions of humanity. Mahito is a curse that has a good grasp of the shape of his own soul. He makes use of his powers to comfort his body to fit the perfection shape that he so desires. In his domain, Mahito is truly at his most dangerous. One of Mahito's powers is idol transfiguration, which allows him to reshape the souls of others, which effectively alters how they look physically. To do this, Mahito has to touch them to manipulate their soul. This gives him the power to twist them to whatever shape he wants them to be. However, inside his domain, we see lots of hands stretched out infinitely around him. It's as if his opponent is standing literally in his hands. So anyone inside his domain is a target for his idol transfiguration technique, no matter how far they are from him. This simply means that if Mahito uses his domain, he has a 99% guaranteed chance of winning, since most sorcerers have no way to guard their souls against his attack, or even heal from the damage he is capable of doing. Despite how strong it looks, it has one weakness, which is the fact that Mahito is forced to touch the souls of all who enters. When he first launched his domain in his fight with Yuji and Nanami, he incurred the anger of Sukuna, who broke the domain because he didn't want anyone to touch Yuji's soul. Deadly sentencing. The only domain in Jujutsu Kaisen that had the power to force even the mighty Sukuna to submit is the deadly sentencing domain of Hiromi Higuruma. Hiromi would join the cast of Jujutsu Kaisen in the Curling Games arc, and his domain expansion is based on court and judgments. Deadly sentencing opens up a court case between Hiromi and his opponent in a world full of guillotines and massive pillars surrounding the room. This domain is non-lethal, which simply means that there's nothing in the domain itself that can attack or win the fight. Also, no form of violence is allowed within it. Higuruma's sentencing grants him a folder filled with evidence that may or may not be useful. This folder goes directly to his brain, and as the judgment Shikigami gives out the charges that need to be fought, as it already knows everything about his opponent. But the judgment doesn't consider the truth when making judgments, rather. It allows each side to present their statements, and if the defendant is proved innocent, he is allowed to go. If you are found guilty, or you lose your trial, the judgment Shikigami pronounces your judgment. Even Higuruma does not know what Judgment's sentence would be. If the enemy is convicted with the death penalty, Judgment would take away all your cursed energy, but if the crimes are really bad, it would call for you to be executed. Hiromi Higuruma would be given a blade made of pure light energy that has the power to end anyone with one touch. This domain makes Hiromi one of the dangerous sorcerers in the series. Authentic mutual love. True mutual love or authentic mutual love is one of strongest domain expansions seen in the entire Jujutsu Kaisen series, and it belongs to Yuta Okatsu. Upon saying the words, Yuta's ring given to him by Rika glows as the entire area around him crumbles apart into a world full of crosses and knots, which symbolizes everlasting bonds in Japan, because these knots gets tighter the more you pull them apart. This domain is quite unique, and this is because it gives two functions. The first function, which is like every other domain expansion, gives the user a sure hit, and in Yuta's case, it seems like he can choose between all of the abilities that he has copied in his arsenal. This means he can pick from any of these abilities and use it as a sure hit of his own domain. For example, if he copies Malevolent Shrine, his sure hit would be Cleave and Dismantle. If it was Chimera Shadow Garden, his sure hit would be the 10 Shadows Curse techniques. However, during the fight with Sukuna in chapter 249, from Sukuna's observation, the actual sure hit of the domain is Angel's Curse. What's very interesting about this domain is that unlike every other domain in the series which actually gives you a stat boost to your own curse technique, Yuta's domain not only makes his curse technique stronger, but it gives him a tremendous stat boost that we haven't seen from any other domain in the entire series. Shingon Sawai's domain is a field full of swords, and each sword has a curse technique that Yuta has copied in the past. Yuta can pick any sword out of the lot and swing it at his opponent, which then makes the copied techniques in it to manifest. Yuta's domain kept Sukuna on his toes the entire time he was within it, nearly killing him with the help of Rika and Yuji. Unlimited Void.
領域展開無料空所
Satoru Gojo is the strongest sorcerer in the present Jujutsu Kaisen world. Well, if you don't consider Sukuna. And his domain expansion, Unlimited Void, is the truest form of his limitless technique. The unique thing about his domain is that the true extent of this domain is just as mysterious as Gojo's technique itself. Most fans of the series don't exactly understand how his limitless technique works or why it makes him so strong. But basically, Gojo takes the concept of infinity and makes it real using his cursed technique. What this simply means is that he can create an infinitely large or small space in between him or any other person or objects. He can also create imaginary objects that tear holes in space-time. Gojo's domain places the opponent in the domain where the person is constantly receiving stimuli in an endless stream to the point where their body can process that massive amount of information and sensations all filling in at once. It's like the target's brain is being filled with lots of signals that your body can't respond to, but overwhelms you so that your body never gets the chance to causing the person to become frozen. Gojo's domain doesn't affect anyone that the user is touching, as seen in his battle with Jogo where he enclosed both Yuji and Jogo in it, but Yuji was unaffected because he was held by Gojo. This domain little weakness would be exploited by Sukuna in their fight, where he was able to avoid the effects of the domain by stalking close to Gojo. Malevolent Shrine. Malevolent Shrine is Sukuna's perfect example of his unparalleled mastery over Jujutsu, which he had gained over the 1,000 years of his life. His domain takes on the appearance of a Buddhist shrine that is adorned with demonic-looking objects like skulls, horns, and teeth. The 4 entrances of the shrine are formed by 4 large, grotesque-looking mouths, complete with human-like teeth and tongues. In his domain, Sukuna turns the world into his personal cutting board as it targets everything inside it with different cutting attacks. The shrine's guaranteed hit ability relentlessly slashes anything in it until only dust remains. Sukuna's attacks in his domain are cleave and dismantle, and these attacks keep going until he dismantles the domain or he's badly injured to keep it up. In his domain, Sukuna can set the 2 attacks against specific targets. Dismantle is used for inanimate objects, and cleave is used for anyone or thing with cursed energy. Sukuna also has the ability to expand his domain without closing the barrier to create a separate space. Using a binding vow to create an opening in his domain that allows an escape route, Sukuna is given the ability to expand the effective range of his guaranteed hit up to a maximum radius of almost 200 meters. One thing that makes Malevolent Shrine unique is that it can operate an outer shell like Unlimited Void and can be cancelled if the shell is destroyed. Malevolent Shrine cannot be destroyed by any means except when Sukuna is too injured to keep up the domain. Idle Death Gamble. Kinjiki Hikari is one of the most underrated characters in Jujutsu Kaisen that was introduced to us in chapter 182, and his domain plays a big part in that. Idle Death Gamble is Hikari's domain expansion, which is based on the pachinko system. Every step of this domain operates on the basis of chance, leaving even Hikari uncertain about his odds of hitting a jackpot. Hikari can hit jackpot when he aligns 3 identical characters, which is much like winning a lottery. Once he hits jackpot, Hikari is given a great advantage over his opponent once he is granted 4 minutes 11 seconds of unlimited cursed energy. He's also granted an automatic reversed curse technique, and once he hits the jackpot, he has higher chances of hitting the jackpot again to unlock these capabilities, which makes him invulnerable indefinitely. However, the odds of him hitting a jackpot is a mere 1 in 239, and Hikari never exceeds 30 rounds in his attempt. Threefold Affliction. Threefold Affliction is the domain expansion of Yorozu. She was a sorcerer from 1,000 years ago, who was then incarnated using Tsumiki Fugishiro, Megumi's sister's body, for the culling game. She's actually obsessed with taking down Sukuna. Yorozu didn't want to kill Sukuna because she hated him. In fact, she loves him so much as it was love at first sight when she met him years back, and she wanted to at all costs to alleviate Sukuna's loneliness. Yorozu's Threefold Affliction is a domain that creates mostly a blank space with several oversized organic structures floating within it. These structures somewhat resembles the disembodied brains and vertical nerve cords of insects. The uniqueness of her domain lies in the fact that whatever she constructs in her domain has a sure hit effect. Her most powerful weapon in the domain is True Sphere, which destroys anything caught in her domain as long as she wills it for so. Just like Jogo, she has a very powerful domain that is severely underrated because the opponent she used it against happens to be the very king of cursed Ryumen Sukuna. During the fight, Sukuna counters the domain by summoning Mahoraga, which shatters True Sphere with its Sword of Extermination, Womb Profusion. In Jujutsu Kaisen, one of the main villains of the series is Kenjaku. His domain expansion is called Womb Profusion, and once opened, it summons a pillar of curses that seems to grow more and more upwards as the totem is filled with lots of screaming cursed spirits. It's important to note that like Sukuna and Megumi, Kenjaku's domain is barrierless domain. This simply means that once it's opened, it simply appears in front of everyone and targets them with its auto-hit attack. And the auto-hit of this domain appears to be a version of Uzumaki that can be endlessly fired towards his opponents. For people who may not be able to remember what the Uzumaki is, it's actually a cursed spirit that Geto could use as a funnel, spinning all of his other curses through its center and shooting them out like a high-powered cursed energy blast of pure strength. But outside of the domain, these curses are used up immediately, so it's quite annoying to restock on curses afterwards. However, this weakness in the domain is negated because there's an endless supply of cursed spirits. This domain is likely called Womb Profusion, because of the endless supply of cursed spirits being born within it. With that, we have just summarized all relevant domain expansions in Jujutsu Kaisen. If you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing and hitting that bell. See you in the next one.